everyone. I'm Sora Lexon, and this is a continuation of our last lesson on money magic or intention, a simple method of producing an intended effect. And perhaps that effect is acquiring resource of some kind. So, long story short, the simplest and most direct method of doing this is to cast a circle in whatever tradition you're in and then do some sort of a cleansing or authoritative claiming of your space. For a Hermetic magician, you could do an LBRP, a lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram. You could work it into a greater banishing ritual or part of your overall daily spellcasting or ritualized work. I tend to suggest that when people do intention magic, they do it towards the end of their other daily or normal practices. I think it creates greater focus, which is very helpful. And it also allows for one of the most important aspects of this kind of magic, which is when it's completed, when it's finished, that you completely forget about it and walk away. And that's simplest to do when it's towards the end of all your other practices, so that when you finish your intention magic, you can clear the space, do your banishing ritual again, close your circle, and forget it. So just very clean and neat right at the end. Set it, forget it, clear your circle, walk away, and don't think about it at all. So obviously that's easier to do at the end of a ritualized practice rather than, say, in the middle. But you could do it anywhere within your greater practices and then walk away from that one aspect of the magic you're doing. Like as you finish your intentional magic, simply complete it, close that circuit, and then move on with your rituals. I just think there's a larger, a more sacred sense of finality when you do it towards the end of a practice in a sacred space. So, again, cast your circle, claim your space, do a banishing ritual or cleansing ritual of some kind, whatever you use. LBRP works very well for Hermetic magicians. And then you're going to light a candle. And what you're doing when you light the candle, this is the long story short. Whatever your intention is, you're going to focus on the candle's flame, and you are going to begin the process of fully visualizing the intended outcome as if it's happening to you in that moment. So you're not asking for anything, you're not wishing for anything, you're not thinking, what would it be like? You are fully, as physically as possible, as emotively as possible, experiencing it happening as if it is happening in that moment. So say you're asking for, a car. Then you would be visualizing the moment perhaps the key is handed to you or the deed, as if you're standing there as someone is presenting you with this. What does that slip of paper feel like in your hands? What are the emotions of gratitude flowing through your neurosympathetic system as this moment takes place? Perhaps there's excitement, a flush of excitement or a great joy. Perhaps you express that in words. You want to know what the air tastes like in that moment, what the pressure in your shoes under your feet feels like. Where are you standing? Is it on grass? Is it gravel? Is it pavement? Fully experience this as if it's happening. Whoever's handing you these keys, what are they expressing? Things like this. Now, again, to be clear, you may be sitting cross-legged quietly, obviously, in your circle while you're going through this. When I'm saying like stand and feel the pressure, you might not be standing. But what you're doing is trying to fully, bodily feel the moment as if it's already happened. Once you've done that, once you reach critical climax, a psychological point of experiencing what has happened, then you end the intention. and I'll get a little more specific about this, but you're going to want to end the intention with a caveat of some kind, saying if it's in the best, wholeness of universal divine will, so mote it be. Kind of, you need to give yourself a scapegoat, because there's a very good chance that whatever magic you just did is not in your best interest. So it's always good to create those ending caveats, or to genuinely and authentically, after experiencing full gratitude and appreciation for this thing, whatever you just received mentally, to acknowledge the universe or the forces you're working with, and be aware of them, and also perhaps ask for their guidance and protection, because your magic is going to work for better or worse. You just need it possibly to be for better. So there is that caveat. But so you set this intention, you experience this thing as wholly as possible, and then you're going to say your closing line, whatever it may be, your scapegoat, your protection phrase, and then you're going to blow out the candle and completely forget about it. Close out your circle. This is why I say do it towards the end of the ritual, whatever your ritual practices within your temple or sacred space may be. And you're just completely going to forget about it. You have to completely release all that emotion, all of that physiological state building you just did in your conscious and subconscious mind, in your actual biologic manifested material being. You have to then release it completely. Releasing it completely, what we call set it and forget it. When you forget it, when you completely release it, that's how it enters into the universal dynamic energies that can then bring it to fulfillment. If you do not release it, if you do not forget it after setting it, then you are continually setting it, seeking it, and therefore not receiving it. But if you set it and forget it, you're no longer seeking it and can receive it because you're not thinking about it. You have to completely let it go. There actually is a crucial element to this where the wanting of whatever it is fully ends, ceases, because you know yourself to already have this thing. It just isn't in your hand in that temporal moment yet, but in a way it already is as well. When you get there, that is when magic starts working. So to be, again, in simplest words, very clear, you have to let go of the ask completely. So if it was for something like a car, you do all of this, then you blow out the candle and it's gone. It leaves your mind. You don't think about it. You don't stress about it. There's no anxiety about it. Actually, I suggest also, it's one of the many neuropsychological tricks you can learn in higher Hermetic lore, is, the deactivation of the amygdala really helps with anxiety. And after a very heavy, possibly draining ritual session, especially with something like high emotive, intentional spell casting, to close your circle, forget it, and then go for a walk. Just go for a walk. Walking, moving the body in a pediantic way actually deactivates the amygdala. So it reduces anxiety. It will help you completely release and let go of the magics you just did, which you can see in some older lore as well, that when high magics were perhaps done on top of a tor or a hilltop, there would often be a spiral path leading up and then away from where these practices were done. You'd have to walk. You'd literally have to hike slowly and let go of your meditative state completely, deactivate the amygdala and any anxiety or stress or leftover neurological feedback that would be around in confluence with whatever spell work you had done. So in a very, again, just a little hint, not necessary completely, but something I find very useful, especially when I'm helping, I don't want to say beginners because we're all where we are on the path, but when you're starting to learn these processes from the experience of another, just a little bit of experience I can pass on. It does help to, after you set it, forget it, release it, to then just walk calmly for a few minutes, maybe just around your apartment or your house. Or if you're forced to do this in some sort of less than ideal space, get out of your car for a minute and walk around. Just take in nature, even if that means maybe just a suburban lawn with one little weed inside of it or something. But just, you need to deactivate the amygdala. It will help with any anxiety, and it will help you release the ask, which is fundamental. Now, the candle, again, it's not entirely necessary, but when someone asks for a simple way of doing intentional magics, we talk about the candle. You'll find candle focusing meditative practices almost in any aspect of the occult in any tradition. Again, one of the neuropsychological tricks behind this is, oddly enough, pupillary convergence actually increases focus. This is just a scientific fact of how our brains are wired to work. So when you focus on a point, say like on the tip of a candle flame, you actually help hone the mind to help you focus on what you're doing. In this instance, intentional magic. Although, excuse me, just to point out, if you feel like low motivation, say in the workplace in front of your computer screen, it's still a very valid biologic. It's not a trick. It's not a parlor trick. It's a very real happening. But whenever you're experiencing low motivation, you can go ahead and focus on one point, even say on a screen, pick one icon, focus on it very intently, and that will, pupillary convergence increases focus of the mental state. So all these kind of little, neuropsychological tricks very much inside of magic to help promote different states of mind, different meditative states, and the ability to have your magic really take strong effect. So now that I've said all that, the candle helps with that, the focus helps with that, and then also it does create an energetic bridge, which when you're just beginning or maybe don't fully trust your magics, that energetic bridge can really help with sending the message. And that's what you're doing. You are manifesting a construct into reality within the universe. That's what you're doing. Your thoughts are your reality. So when you're doing this kind of magic, having an energetic bridge, even though it's not completely necessary, because the truth is we're all swimming in a sea of endless energetic signatures all the time. But when you're starting, the energetic bridge of a candle, which can, it very much does have a presence on different planes other than just the ones you might be consciously in awareness or recognition of, say like your material conscious plane. A candle's flame, that energy, that warmth, that light actually has manifestations on other planes without your help. So it can help create that bridge, and it can help focus, not just symbolically, but energetically, the power of magic like this. When you're just maybe starting with it or haven't fully found a way to trust it, know that that flame is doing a great deal of the work for you, or perhaps despite you. So it does create, like all other ritual aspects and trappings and costumes and objects and artifacts and magic, it does help create the power that allows your ability to work, even though your ability could work without it. Now that I've said all of that, so that was simple, right? Fairly simple. That's the idea. That's the method. It works. It works every time. It works every time. It works if you don't trust it. It works as long as you hit critical mass emotively. Your magic is going to work in this way. But please be aware, that's actually the easy part. The not so easy part is understanding what is in your best interest and why. And when I was talking about this caveat that you should always have at the end of a practice like this is part of that. In alchemy, I think I mentioned this in the last video, Hermeticists, among other things, we speak of all things having scales, right? The pendulum swings. Temperature has a scale, up and down. Size has a scale. Awareness, too, has a scale. And again, as above, so below. If there's an ant made up of cells walking about its daily business, while the cell, although alive, has no awareness of the ant, the cell has no ability to perceive, within that ant with that kind of knowing that there's something larger than it, that it's a part of, which it's caught up and moved by or inside of, right? But when the ant walks, the cell still travels, right? So all things have scales. It's kind of a strange metaphor, but so the cell doesn't perceive movement in that way from within the ant, even though it is being moved. It has no method by which to break through to that next level of consciousness, of being, given the current state it's in as just a single cell. So, right, just so the human is larger than and has a different kind of knowing than the ant. That would be the next kind of step up that scale, right? So if there is a tiny ant on your shoe and you walk, the ant might think itself stationary and stable. And unmoving, completely unaware that it's caught up in the dynamism of your shoe walking, until it, say, steps down off your shoe or walks away in its little ant feet in an entirely new place. And now it's wondering, maybe a little bit lost and in its own little ant way, what on terra firma just happened to it. It could seem magical, it could seem miraculous, but what's really going on is that it doesn't have the conscious ability to perceive that next scale up the ladder of that form of awareness and movement. So hopefully this isn't too confusing for everyone. So although the ant is, kind of aware, it still isn't. It has no way of conceptualizing a type of existent entity, greater unperceivable force that is the human, right? Even when it's actively moved by one. It has no way of recognizing that. It has no way to communicate, say, if there was an ant on your shoe, it can't talk to you. It can't talk to you, the human. Even if it, say, wanted to, far beyond the language barriers and symbolic understanding of universal conception and context. But we exist on a different experiential scale, a different scale of awareness than the ant. The same way the ant exists on a different experiential scale than the cell within it, right? So again, in this same way, there's always something above and there's always something below in this ladder, in this series of scales of, say, perception and experience. And just as the cell has no means in its current form to directly communicate with the ant in a way that the ant can maybe perceive, ants, I think, communicate with chemical signals or something like that. So that cell has no way to break its paradigm to maybe signal to the ant with antenna, because the cell doesn't have an antenna to communicate with. In the same way, the ant moving its antenna can't communicate with a human. It doesn't have language. So there must be things above us in preceding rungs that we have no means, given our current paradigm, to even begin to go about knowing how to communicate with. When we talk about as above, so below, we're talking about a thought experiment in which, when you look at the constructs, the physical laws of magic and reality, which all nature is magic. Sometimes people get confused when we use the word magic, but when we do this, you can apply this thought experiment and see that there are always scales. And once you come to an awareness of that there's something smaller, something bigger, something colder, something hotter, that there are different levels in all things, then you can apply it to other paradigms, say like conscious states or awareness, things of that nature. And that's a much bigger, all is mind and as above, so below, that it can really help solve a lot of problems for the magician because it's a rule. It is a law that you can apply across the board, and it can really help you understand how things work. If you don't know how something works, start applying the laws, right? Start looking at the rules. They don't change. So knowing this, there must be things both below us and above us in different contexts of awareness that we can't perceive, even though they're very much perhaps aware of us in certain ways. You see how this works? Kind of like we're aware of the ant, but we can't contact it. So that same kind of idea can be applied in descendant scale and in ascendant scale, forms of awareness that are moving both so slowly, let's say, below our threshold of vibratory awareness as to be imperceivable, because we don't have a construct, a method in our current form to be able to go about even comprehending how we would perceive something like that. But there is also, to continue this thought experiment, a way in which all three entities in their differing planes of existent awareness sorry about that. Can be aware of the same thing at the same time. I don't know if that's going to feed back into the video, but the table was just moving. So certain energetic fields. Yeah, we can be aware of each other in certain ways, can't we? So certain energetic fields, after all, correspond with all three, the cell, the ant, and the human. Say if the sun is suddenly, right, we can all experience the sun. The cell, the ant, and the human can all be in communication with the sun, and in that way share experiential awareness in unison, even though they can't necessarily communicate directly with each other. Again, it's a little bit confusing. All of this has meaning, by the way, to doing intentional magics, and I'll get to that. But there are energetic fields that correspond with all three of these things. And if you think about that in a larger way, can correspond with everything. So if there are energetic fields that can correspond with everything, again, that candle, that energy signature, that forms a bridge. If you think about that, you kind of begin to get the idea of some of what's going on when you're doing intentional magics. If the sun is suddenly burning hot and can't be evaded, the human, the ant, and the cell are all going to suffer that experience of suffering. If the shade, if shelter can be found, then the human, the ant, and the cell within the ant will all experience relief. The cell will no longer be, unalterably corrupted by UV radiations that it isn't prepared to handle, right? The ant will no longer die. The human will cease to have its skin burn. And again, if you think about the effect where one is complete destruction, one is possible complete destruction, and one is a minor form of destruction that allows the entity to continue to exist, again, scales to everything, right? They're all going to suffer. They're going to suffer in different descending ways. So but there's a great power in this lesson for those with ears to hear. Some things, some energies affect everything, or at least come into contact with much more and across more planes of being. The signature of energy of the sun moves in such a way, for instance, in this particular poorly rendered metaphor, that it touches and affects all the other energies that swim through the material plane that have some correlating vibration with UV radiation. And here's the thing. Sunlight, for instance, is not the only energetic field we swim through that has effects across different, invisibly interconnected and completely networked presentations of being. If you know anything about Buddhism and that beautiful net that connects all things, that's another way to really begin to visualize this. And that's not even close to the beauty of that sacred tradition's ability to really get you in touch with the ideas that I am poorly trying to convey here. So the seas of energetic fields we swim in, they are by no means even only on the material three-dimensional plane that we externally perceive. There are other planes that can be perceived, and they're not all external. You can close your eyes, right, and imagine rain falling through leaves. You can take a moment to do that. You can hear it, a tapping as it falls, it filters down through a tree. You might sense a coolness and a cleanness to the air, humidity. There might be a sense of blueness or greenness, depending on how you convey sympathetic idea forms. But what plane, while you're doing that, what does that exist on when you close your eyes and think of rain falling through tree leaves? Right? Not a material one. It's not actually happening in your environment, and yet it is. It's not a three-dimensional plane either, but you tapped into it readily enough just by stopping to think about it. And it absolutely just had an effect on you physically, emotionally, and mentally. Very likely a soothing effect, hopefully, which is why I chose it, something that is in no way damaging to any of us. While your heart rate slowed a bit, nature visualization has that effect, again, on our limbic system. Oxygen flowed freer between red blood cells because your heart was slowing down, creating a higher level of oxygenation, which allows for toxins to be removed faster, cleaner. Your less stimulated sympathetic nervous system, when I talked a little bit slowly and was discussing just the rain falling through the trees, right? All of that allowed healthy chemical and nerve interactions to gain the upper hand, rather than higher chemical quick movement based on listening to fast speed language like what I'm conveying here. You connected mentally with the mental image of rain, and if you did it, and leaf, which stimulates memory of things that you weren't necessarily in direct, complete conscious awareness of things like wetness, what wetness feels like, coolness, temperature drops, the sound of little raindrops falling. All of these things that you didn't necessarily bring completely to the forefront of your mind are connected with memory stimulation of something like rain falling. And the secondary memories then connected to those stimulations of past experiences of rain, which you didn't even know you tapped into, but you absolutely did in order to create that visualization. So whether or not you're consciously aware of, past events tied with emotional triggers to the sensation of watching or being in rain, all of that just instantaneously flooded forward, submerged somewhat below your direct consciousness, and coalesced into the emotion you felt while re-experiencing those previous trigger states, even though you weren't aware that you were re-experiencing those previous trigger states, because you briefly interacted with the energetic field of a non-dimensional plane, one that you can access and interact with by the use of will and focused intention of imagining just a specific thing. Now think about other much larger energetic fields you aren't constantly aware of, but yes, do have access to in the same way when you choose to. Think about how much larger amount of directed will and set intention would then do in those fields within their vast mesh of networks, of matrices, some spanning across dimensional systems we can't even interact with ourselves, but we can interact with the network that they're connected to. And this is where we begin to skim the surface of sacred power of directed will. Because we are one facet of the all experiencing itself as an individuated part of the whole. And very often there's too much for the memory to handle and then upload when I'm making these videos. I think this one's already gone a little bit too long. So unfortunately, I think we're going to have to continue in lesson 3. Until next time.